Many people believe Trump artificially is crashing the markets to bring about a great financial reset, and that in some key ways, Ripple's XRP will play a major role in the new financial system, as there have been a lot of rumors and speculation surrounding new documents over at the SEC. Now, it's no secret that the markets have been spooked by Trump's latest moves, but many believe that Trump is purposefully doing this to force the hand of the Fed to not only lower interest rates, but to stimulate the economy and even bend the knee to Trump's demands, considering they have made note, and Powell has made note of the fact that he would not resign even if Trump asked him to. It seems there's a real war going on over at the Fed. And in a recent post by Market Sniper, basically stating that Howard Lutnick, Trump's Commerce Secretary, said a recession is worth it, as the markets are in free fall, Wall Street is panicking, and Main Street is about to feel the pain. But do these guys know something that we don't? So if Trump is actually doing this to save the economy, then why has it recently been crashing, while crypto at the same time has been getting pummeled, as both asset classes are treated as risk on asset classes by fund managers and institutional players? They will sell anything that is volatile in a potentially more volatile environment under tariffs, which explains why everyone is currently complaining about the Trump dump. But it's important to remember, market participants are typically very short-sighted and often overreact to incoming information if it causes uncertainty and is a deviation from the norm. So let's think about it for a second. Right now, Trump might not seem good for the economy, but was Biden truly good for our economy? Well, it's easy to point to the fact that the markets were actually rising. But that's likely due to his policy of overspending with virtually no oversight, which was actually the norm. And market participants like predictability and will tend to trend up in environments like this. In other words, if you print more dollars, markets will tend to rise. As in the last few years, markets have been pumping because of one thing and one thing alone: global M2 money supply. And right here we have a correlation chart of the US stock market and its capitalization versus the M2 money supply. Typically, and we're talking all the way back to 2000 on this specific chart, as M2 money supply increases, so do stock market capitalizations. And in one scenario in particular right here, where in 2021 or 2022, when the M2 money supply started to decline, so did the market capitalization of the stock market. Then what happened was we started to see a rise, as markets tend to be forward looking in the market right before we started printing more dollars. In other words, any higher valuations in stocks or companies and even crypto probably wasn't due to actual growth, as the US predominantly has offshored its manufacturing, labor, and productivity, enriching other nations and making the US more dependent upon those nations. Higher valuations were actually due to money printing, greed, an elevated national debt, which was a house of cards, unsustainable, and will eventually bring the US and the world to its knees. Something actually had to change. Now, one of the only ways to fix this is to incentivize other nations, or even our own companies that are based out of the US, however manufacture outside of the US, to bring this industry back onshore. Otherwise, they all face a very large economic hit called a tariff, where they have to increase their prices. But if the demand does not remain the same or income levels don't increase, people simply will not buy. In the short term, of course, you're going to feel pain, and it's going to cost companies billions of dollars to build infrastructure yet again here, but it will have a long-lasting effect to make the US more independent. It will increase our economic output and enrich people nationwide. And you have to think about this. What are the roots of the United States? Why did we become so rich and powerful to begin with? Well, that's because we used to produce things. Then we used to sell to other nations. Think to the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution. Think to Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, or even Cornelius Vanderbilt. But as with any nation, you are going to deal with some corruption, and through corrupt politicians and terrible leaders, our future was sold to other nations, and we began subsidizing the whole world and funding corrupt globalist organizations, much to which Doge, under the leadership of Elon Musk, has uncovered these ridiculous payments over the last couple of months. Needless to say, if Trump does succeed in causing an economic crash, this would actually force the Fed to lower interest rates in response. As we've remained at an unreasonably high level of 4.5% or 450 basis points for a period of 807 days, which is going to slow growth and economic activity. However, if markets actually do crash and the Fed responds by lowering interest rates, in all instances where interest rates are invariably low, people tend to borrow. When people borrow, this stimulates economic activity and growth, not only for individuals, but for corporations as well. Combine this borrowing with a strong incentive to bring manufacturing and labor back to the United States, and you have a recipe for an economic golden age of prosperity. But it's going to come with a bit of pain. Now think about it. When tariffs and honest audits of wasteful government spending bring in more revenue than taxing your own citizens into the dirt, you can afford to drop federal taxes altogether on the middle class people or anyone earning less than $150K per year, which Donald Trump recently announced. Combine this with Doge savings from ridiculous things like DEI education in countries like Ecuador, or making mice transgender, which was actually confirmed. If people get taxed less, they can afford not only to borrow more, and no one can disagree with that, but they can also afford to start building companies and to get creative with any extra finance, because when you're typically financially squeezed, you don't have room for creativity. You have room only to work and pay bills. When you actually have a bit of extra cash, you begin to find ways to put it to work for you, whether that's on vacations or discretionary spending, or to actually build industry and companies, which will create more jobs. And right here, I have a chart of consumer loans across all commercial banks. And during the time of the Biden administration, from about January of 2021 all the way till when he was actually out of office, you can see that we saw consumer loans increase to the tune of $423.9 billion for a 27% increase. Now, many people borrowed likely due to government waste and overspending, and actually there was a ton of fraud in these loans that were never actually repaid and were arguably even defaulted on. But this is also because we experienced record amounts of inflation, actually the highest inflation to the tune of 9.1% in over 40 years since the 80s. So people borrowed, but probably because they were getting squeezed under the stress of high inflation. When you live in an inflationary environment, stock valuations will go up. Your economy might look good at surface level as the rich get richer, but this widens the gap between the middle class and the poor. This is not a long-term or a sustainable solution. We are in the highest rates of debt we've ever seen in history, and it was only projected to continue to climb unless something changed. In other words, people wouldn't get squeezed if there wasn't record levels of inflation, and inflation goes away if you no longer need to print dollars to function properly as a government, and instead produce dollars as government actually becomes productive, which is what we should have been doing all along. Our own government should produce energy and then sell it. Our own government should produce goods and then sell them. We should create for fertile soil for our own citizens to produce products to sell to other nations. And matter of fact, as a nationalist, in other words, we should care about our nation, we should tax other nations and not our own citizens. We've had this thing backwards for far too long. So the real question is, when does this all end? When will markets recover? And what's going to happen next for crypto? Well, stay tuned, because I'll cover the crypto markets, I'll cover XRP, what my personal targets are, and what our team of pros over at Altcoin Pro University are doing right now in this volatile macro environment. And as always, it's been a long one going, guys? If you're still with me, and if you're still feeling blessed and bullish, comment 777. And if you're going to be the wealthiest person in your family tree, smash the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Paul, and you can find me on Twitter or X at PauliDefi, PAULIEDEFI. There's really no beating around the bush, ladies and gentlemen. Markets, especially the stock market and arguably the crypto market as well, has seen a pretty nasty sell-off as we peaked off at about 6150 on the S&P 500. It dumped all the way down to 5500 for nearly a 10% loss. We've actually broke down below some major range supports and made a new lower low right here on the price. So even if we retrace and let's say we pump right back up into this range of like $6,000 on the S&P 500, we could potentially put in a new local lower high before continuing our trend down. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly going to happen, but who really knows how far the Trump fears surrounding tariffs are going to take us, as even the Wall Street Journal is putting out articles basically stating how Wall Street and business got Trump wrong, and how when he actually got elected, the markets rallied extremely hard in November and December, and then not only cooled off, but are really seeing a major retracement into the current months of February and March. And that's because Trump is truly unpredictable, as even in this article, they state that Trump's arbitrary and personalized policy making is at odds with the predictability that businesses crave. And this is something that we stated earlier in the video. And this unpredictability has definitely affected crypto markets, as even after the Trump pump on announcing a bunch of cryptos were going to be in the crypto strategic reserve, at the end of the day, we are now officially below what used to be our major support range between $92,000 to $91,000. Again, this used to be a resistance, became a support. 9 separate times we touched the range, and then 2 separate times we were sold back off at the range once we broke below. So this remains to be seen whether or not we are going to take a while to break back above this range for some new all-time highs. And yes, it's important to remember that from a macro perspective, we are still in a longer term uptrend, but who's to say that it's not going to take some months for us to break back in the range, as it was back here in April of 2023 for a period of about 190 days of sideways range trading and price action, or even back in 2024 from March all the way into October for 231 days. I'm not saying it's going to take that long, and I'm not too sure, but from a weekly perspective, to get sold off this bad and this strong leads me to believe that there's still more uncertainty ahead, and we would likely need to see a bullish engulfing green candle. So even if we were to trade right back up into this range, we could potentially see some sell pressure into that 88K range or even 90K range before selling off further for a new lower low down into the 62,000 range and even the $70,000 range, especially when you look at that VRVP. As you can see on the VRVP on a daily time frame, we do have a lot of resistance up at the $96,000 level, and then we have this huge cliff where we're kind of trading somewhere in the middle. That cliff should take us right back down to $67,000 and potentially even $62,000. So in these ranges, I'd be looking to accumulate not only Bitcoin, but virtually all other major altcoins that I want to add to my bag. And that leads me to XRP. So yes, XRP is actually holding up a heck of a lot better, because as you can see here, Bitcoin touched its range and actually broke down after 9 separate touches. However, XRP is at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and has not touched down a 9th time. But it is possible that if Bitcoin breaks down to that $67,000 to $62,000 level, then XRP would do the same. Now we have a couple of different resistances here when it comes to a downward trend line, and the first would be off the major all-time highs right here down to the Trump pump trade. But realistically, it is very much possible and potential that this could be a bit of a fake out, and so the real trend would be somewhere in this range right here. And as you can see, we've touched it plenty of times here. Yet again, here we had a bull trap, and so it's possible with the amount of volume that we have here and the fact that we are now just starting to trade back up to that 10 and 20 EMA. However, we don't have the blue line crossing over the yellow line, which is the 20 EMA. This is still relatively bearish with some new lower lows. So one last touch down here at the $2 range to the $195 135 range should take us lower and realistically back down to the 145 to 150 range at minimum. And by the way, these are ranges and prices that I would personally really like to buy. And if for whatever reason there is mass panic and Bitcoin continues to sell off during this Trump dump, then yes, my local bottom and major buy range would be down here at the $1.13 to $1.10 range. This is where I would load up on an XRP bag, considering it is looking relatively strong to the market. Because as you can see here, when XRP pumped for the very first time in a long time, almost 6 years, up to that $1.50 range right over here back in November of 2024, you can see that XRP, again, the price action we're looking at, XRP, this green line is Bitcoin. Bitcoin actually relatively underperformed and has consistently underperformed XRP since February 4th of 2025. Whereas XRP is currently up 63%, Bitcoin is down in that same time frame 13.5%. Especially right here, you can see that there's a deviation. Although they might trade relatively correlated, meaning when one goes up, the other goes up. When one goes down, the other goes down. Generally speaking, XRP is holding up better in this range, while Bitcoin, you can see, is trending to the downside. So yes, Bitcoin has broke down. The problem and the thing that I'm worried about is one last touchdown and breakdown below this range. So I would watch very closely, again, the ranges of about $2 down, and I'll go ahead and turn this guy off, down to 195, and I would also watch to see what happens, whether or not we actually break above those EMAs, whether we get a crossover, and most importantly, if we can break above this descending triangle or trend line right here. I think this is going to be extremely important, and if you really wanted to play it tight, you could go from these highs right here through this high right here. In other words, a touch up to that $2.49 to $2.50 range is going to be key, and whether or not we pivot back to the upside or break down for some new lower lows. And that's it for the video, folks. If you enjoyed it and learned something new, be sure to smash the subscribe button and also check out Altcoin Pro University. This is your one-stop shop to become a crypto millionaire if that is your goal, and if not, to hit any crypto goal that you have. Now, I can't guarantee you any real results. You obviously have to put in the time, the effort, have a little bit of money behind it, but at the end of the day, we have all the right tools, training, and resources to help you reach those goals. Not only do we have a ton of courses and paying members, one of the best communities in all of crypto that discuss altcoin picks, DeFi yields, airdrop alerts, becoming, basically experts in the world of crypto, but also I host a live weekly call where I cover everything on the technical analysis side and answer all of your questions live. This is stuff that you only get inside of Altcoin Pro University. And not only that, if you were to come over here, you could see that our very own pro analyst and researcher went ahead and actually did a lot of hard work to make sure that everything is organized for you when it comes to starting here, when it comes to strategies and guides on when to buy and when to sell, portfolio management, tax tips, yield farming guides. We even have the how-tos of psychology and wallets and DeFi and bots and how to avoid getting scammed or rugged, and even getting ahead of trends with narratives so that way you can get into a crypto before it blows up. So if any or all of that sounds interesting to you and you want to be on that next live call on Tuesday, then you have to head over to bullrunners.com. You can find the link in the description below and do that before the bonuses run dry. Thanks so much for watching the video, my friend, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.